back to Quarantine Cooking. I'm Jennifer King. Today I'm going to make for you one of my family's favorite recipes, which is classic meatloaf. Now, I love meatloaf and hamburger meat because it is so versatile. And sometimes with my meatloaf, I will spice it up and make it kind of a Southwest meatloaf. Sometimes I go more toward the Italian and make it kind of one giant meatball with kind of like a caprese with basil and tomato and mozzarella. Today though, I'm keeping it very traditional and doing the classic meatloaf for you. So in my classic meatloaf, I actually add some vegetables, and then I also add lots of spices and some seasoning. And then I add a binder, so I do add some breadcrumbs, some oatmeal, and also an egg so that it all comes together. Now I went ahead and diced up most of my vegetables beforehand. There is one ingredient in there missing, and if you're familiar with a mirepoix, or in the South they call it the Holy Trinity, a mirepoix is onions, celery, and carrots. And in the South, they trade the celery for the bell pepper. So I actually added bell pepper in here, red and green, and then some carrot, celery. I'm kind of mixing the mirepoix and the Holy Trinity. The only ingredient missing in here to make it complete is an onion. So I thought it'd be fun to actually take the time to show everyone how to properly cut an onion. The number one question I get asked for onion cutting is, how do you not cry when you cut an onion? Well, what I tell people is that just make sure that you don't get emotionally attached to your onion, and then you won't cry. No, I know it's bum, right? No, seriously though, the only two ways I know not to cry, and I've heard lots of different solutions, matches and holding a match and putting it in the freezer and all this stuff. But really all you want to do is learn how to properly cut an onion, or get yourself some really fashionable onion goggles. So for me, I'd rather learn how to cut the onion properly. But it is what it is what makes you cry are all the fumes that come out of the onion. So sometimes you'll see people dicing up an onion, just running their knife back and forth. And what that's doing is it's creating a ton of onion fumes, and you're gonna get more tears that way. So if you learn how to cut the onion properly, and the less cuts you have to do to get the dice you want, the less you're actually gonna cry. So the first thing you're going to want to do, and I know this is something that they taught me at Le Cordon Bleu, an onion grows in the ground. And so if you look at the ends, the roots of the onion, you'll see that there's some dirt in the root of the onion. You never want to run your knife from the outside with melons or with onions through it, because then you're taking the dirt through your product, and that has the bacteria in it. So the first thing I do when I cut an onion, and this is what they taught us, is to cut both ends off your onion and then get rid of them. And once they're gone, you don't have to worry about them anymore. So that's what we're gonna do today. Then you take your knife, and I cut the onion in half, okay? So I'm just gonna use maybe half an onion today in this recipe, so I'll set the other half aside. And I'm just gonna take the outer peel off your onion. So now you have this little half onion moon, right? And you also wanna make sure you have a good cutting board, and that you're also holding your knife properly. So to hold your knife, this is a chef knife, okay? This is the spine of the knife, this is the handle. This is called the pinch grip. You take your pointer finger and your thumb, and you pinch right past the bolster of the knife, okay? And then you wrap your other fingers around. So you're choking up on the knife like a baseball bat. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna give you more control and power when you're using your knife. Now, the sharpest part of your knife, anyone know? Most people say it's the tip, but actually it's right back here, the heel of the knife. This is your sharpest part of your knife. So there is a rocking motion that's done when you're actually cutting and dicing and slicing properly. A lot of times you'll hear beginners doing this, and that's not okay, because it's actually hurting your knife. It's making it dull faster. What the noise you should hear, you hear that? That's a rocking motion. That's the motion and the sound you want when you're properly using a knife, especially a chef's knife. But any knife, you always want to choke up and make sure you're using that pinch grip. Okay, the other part of that is you always want to make sure you have a nice, good cutting board. You want something that has grips, or you can put a wet towel underneath so that it doesn't slip and slide, because that's very dangerous, obviously. So I pull my cutting board to the very edge of my counter, especially when I'm cutting onions, because I'm going to use it as a guide as I slice up my onion. Now I'm going to dice this onion about the same size as I diced everything else, so it looks pretty in the meatloaf, and it also cooks at the same rate as the other vegetables. So here we go. So I'm using the larger face also of the onion. There's a smaller root end. I'm using the larger face. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in with my heel of my knife and go about halfway through and pull out of my onion. And what I'm doing is I'm doing horizontal cuts up my onion, just about maybe 1/4 of an inch apart. And then I'm gonna go down my onion about halfway with the tip of my knife and make about the same size 1/4 inch cuts vertically down my onion. Make sure you watch that thumb. When I was in culinary school, first time cutting an onion properly, I sliced my thumb because I didn't move it out of the way fast enough. So be careful. Now I can move my onion back. And now I'm just going to do about 1/2 or 1/4 inch dice to keep it even. And look at that. Now that our onion is all diced up, I'm gonna go ahead and add that with our other veggie ingredients. And then we're gonna pour all of this into our ground sirloin here. So there's all our beautiful vegetables. I'm gonna add those in. And I don't know if I'll use all of it because it's not as much meat as I normally have. So that's about 1 pound of hamburger meat. If you can get 2 pounds, maybe 2 packages, that would be great. So I'm just eyeballing right now. I can save this for another recipe another day because any base to any soup, or if you're gonna roast some veggies, takes a mirepoix or a trinity. So I might save these and actually make some red beans and rice, some southern red beans and rice this week. So I'll just set these aside. Our veggies are all in with our sirloin. I'm gonna go ahead and start seasoning up and adding flavor to our meat. So I do have, and Andy, if you want to kind of pan over here, I do have a lot of ingredients that I add in. Most of these you can probably find in your pantry of some sort. But obviously I'm going to add salt because salt equals flavor. So I'm going to add a pinch of salt. I'm also going to add in some garlic salt. You can add garlic powder if you don't have garlic salt, but that's really a key ingredient to add some garlic flavor. If you didn't have either one of those, then what you could do is also just mince up some garlic and put in with your veggies. I have a steak seasoning, and again, if you don't have this, you don't need it, but you could add in some fresh herbs if you have some fresh herbs around, or some dried herbs and make your own little spice mix. And then of course you gotta have pepper. So I'm putting in some freshly ground pepper. My secret ingredient again that I used in my roast is also gonna be added to my meatloaf. So Lipton's French onion soup mix, I'm gonna add that in. And I'll probably just add about, because this again is a little bit less meat than I'm used to, so I'm just gonna add about 1/2 a packet in. That'll give a nice oniony flavor too to your meat. Now we're gonna start adding the wet ingredients. And I have some tamari soy sauce that I add in, which adds some nice flavor. And I'm just gonna use the rest of this one because it's almost out, so there you go. And then I'm gonna add some Worcestershire sauce. Love Worcestershire sauce, so just a couple squirts of that in there. And then I have some barbecue sauce, and I just like to do this because of color and also a little bit of smoky flavor in there. That helps. So any barbecue sauce will work. And then ketchup. Ketchup is a staple with meatloaf. It's like one of those things that we're gonna garnish with too. So I add a squeeze of ketchup. So we have now all our wet ingredients in here, besides the egg, which is gonna bind it. So I will add the egg in a moment, but I'm gonna add something to kind of, it gives texture to your meatloaf. So a lot of times people will add oatmeal, or they'll add saltine crackers that they've crushed up, or just breadcrumbs. But I like to use kind of a combination of all three, right? Because why not? So I'm adding just some organic plain breadcrumbs here. If you have, if you do have Italian breadcrumbs or something, that will work too for this. If you have panko, Japanese breadcrumbs, that'll work as well. And then I have Quaker oats, just some, regular oatmeal here. And I'm being pretty heavy-handed with this because it is pretty wet. I do add a lot of wet ingredients, so I want it to really bind and come together. So don't be afraid to kind of, use enough. And if I have to add more later, I will. And these are just some wafer crackers. Again, I like it for the consistency. I like to see those pieces of cracker in my meatloaf. So I just take them and just kind of crunch them up into big kind of pieces, as big as, much as I can with my hand to kind of grind them down. And then finally, I'm gonna add an egg, because the egg is gonna help bind all these wet ingredients together, and it's gonna make our meatloaf really nice. So I'm gonna add that in. It's always a good idea to crack your egg in another dish, just in case you get eggshell. You can get it out of here a lot easier than you're gonna be able to get out of here, right? Okay, so now what I'm gonna do, make sure you take your rings off, is I'm going to just use my hands, because your hands are the most useful tools in the kitchen. And you get to be, if you have kids, you could enlist them to do this, because it's kind of like playing with Play-Doh. And you're just really gonna work all those ingredients together and make sure it all kind of gets incorporated into your sirloin. Now, if it feels wet to you, because mine feels a little wet, I'm probably gonna add some more dry ingredients in here. So I'm gonna add a little bit more of the oatmeal and the breadcrumbs. I think there's enough cracker in here, so I'm gonna just add those two just to get it a little bit more dry, because it feels a little wet right now. So this is the tricky part when you're making meatloaf. Now I've got meatloaf hands, so if you have someone in the kitchen, say, hey, sprinkle some more, but the guy in my kitchen right now is taping me, so I'm gonna go wash my hands off. I'm back. So now I'm gonna add some more oatmeal. And I'm gonna add some more regular breadcrumbs. Or if you have panko or Italian breadcrumbs, that'll work too. All right, so hopefully it's the final time hands go in here. And it's really a kind of feel, you have to get a feel for it. You don't want it too wet, you don't want it too dry. It's kind of one of those things that you just want an even amount. And something else to remember with hamburger meat, even when you're making hamburger patties at home, you are gonna get to know this little meatloaf pretty well, getting your hands in there, but you don't wanna overwork it. So if you overwork it, it becomes tough hamburger meat. So, or even hamburger patties will become tough little hockey pucks, and you don't want that. Okay, mine feels good now. So I'm gonna grab, you will need a loaf pan dish. You can also do this on a cookie sheet with parchment paper and kind of form your loaf. It will stay in the loaf form, but it's better if you do have a little bread dish, okay? Now, I don't spray anything in mine because I don't need to really. It comes out pretty easily. So I'm just gonna kind of form it. See how I formed it into the shape already of the loaf, of the meatloaf? So I kind of do that, just kind of shape it in here, in the bowl, so that when I scoop it up and in, it makes it a lot easier to get in there, already shaped and formed. And I just kind of press it down a little bit just to kind of get it into the corners. You don't want to like press it too hard, but you do just want to kind of get it in there nicely. And then what I do is I kind of make a trough down the middle. Andy, you might want to come a little closer so you can see the trough in there. Kind of make a little river moat there. Okay, the final touch before we put our meatloaf into the oven is just kind of, we made a trough in the top. What I like to do is just kind of finish it with some barbecue sauce. So Andy, you might want to come up on that a little bit. And then look at that, yum. And then I just kind of put some ketchup over the top too. And then I just finished seasoning it with a little bit more black pepper on top and a little pinch of salt, of kosher salt. So it's gonna go into a 350-degree oven for about an hour. Depends how big your meatloaf is, but mine will take about an hour. It might go an hour and 15 if you have a little bigger meatloaf. You do wanna keep your meatloaf covered. So I keep it covered for about 45 minutes. And then after 45 minutes, I take the foil off so that the top can get nice and crispy and golden brown. It kind of takes that sugar and the ketchup and the barbecue sauce and makes it nice and caramelly. So I'm gonna go ahead and cover up our little meatloaf here and put it into the oven. I'll be back in a little bit to show you guys what it looks like when it's all done. Okay, the timer just went off for our meatloaf. So I did take the foil off about 15 minutes ago. So now it got that nice color it should have. Let's see what it looks like. Oh yeah. All right, so that's what it should look like. Look how beautiful that is. That's golden brown and delicious. The ketchup and the barbecue have nicely caramelized. So I'm gonna set this down and close the oven. And then we're gonna get this on the plate because everyone at my house has been smelling this for about an hour now and they are starving. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it up. Now, ideally, I would let this sit. I would let the meat rest. You're supposed to let meat rest for about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, just so all the juices can reincorporate. but just to get a slice to show you guys what it looks like, I did make some mashed potatoes, so I'm gonna go ahead and put some yummy mashed potatoes on the plate here. And I'll slice up our meatloaf. And usually I just use like a butter knife and cut a slice here. And then I kind of use my knife to kind of go around the edge in case it did stick at all. Let me put my glove back on because this is still super hot. And then I'm gonna kind of use a cake cutter to help get out the first piece here. It's always the tough one, the first piece. So I've got my, oof, look at that. Isn't that delicious? Look at how pretty that is. And then I also made a garden salad for the family tonight. So Andy, can follow me over to get to the salad here. And this is just a simple salad with cucumbers and tomatoes. I just tossed lightly in some ranch dressing because the kids love ranch. But look how pretty that is. So a nice, healthy, yummy, classic meatloaf, comfort food dinner tonight. Thanks for joining me tonight, guys. I hope to see you next week on Quarantine Cooking. Stay safe.